You know, sometimes you got to find the balance between the value of something and the cost of maintaining it. This car in particular, it's a 98 Toyota Camry. Generally, they're very reliable and kind of bulletproof. It's hard to explain how I have this and why I have it, but I got nothing in it except for a radiator. So I got this car with a bad radiator and was a little apprehensive about getting one for it because you never know why you have coolant leaks that look like they were caused by too much pressure. But regardless, I got the radiator for this thing and put it in and topped it off with coolant. And we ran the car for a couple of hours, drove it around, even washed it, and it did really good. So then we got home, we turned the car off, and we're standing around, and all of a sudden, pop goes the weasel. Yeah, pop goes the weasel. One of the hoses blew up. So, usually, when you have a leak that looks like it was due to pressure, and you fix that, and then you develop another leak, it's pretty indicative of something that I'm not going to mention because I do believe that you can talk things up. But hopefully it's not that. But there's one thing that can create a whole lot of pressure in your cooling system. And often when you have that problem, that pressure will find the weakest link in the system. And when you fix that, it finds another weak link. And you know, you could continue this cycle until you really spent too much money. But I went ahead and decided to go ahead and get some hoses. And we're going to try to change those and see how it does. And hopefully I can start driving this car just to work. And I'm not going to worry about sitting my dirty ass in it after working all day. But I will say that if I change these hoses and something else blows, I'm not going to fix it a third time. So there's the top one. And I'm doing the bottom one just cause. But I really need to get something to drain the coolant in. Got a small pan and a large bucket. No, this is fine. So we'll have to do a little at a time, and when the small pan fills up, we drain it in the bucket. Good thing about these cars is you can almost do everything under the hood. I don't have to get under it for anything. Sometimes these clamps are turned, you know, facing the bottom. I always try to turn the clamps where I can reach them from the top. I've already done that to this one, but fortunately I don't have to get under it for anything really, other than changing the oil. Let's see if we can get this clamp off the hose without flinging it off into oblivion. Unfortunately, I ordered the lower hose. Well, I ordered both hoses, and when I went to pick them up from Advance, they didn't have the lower hose. They had this flex hose, which I think is long enough. I guess we're about to find out. But I just realized I may not have. This is a lot thicker, the outer diameter, so I'm not sure if these clamps will work, and I feel like I'm about to lose it. So I've got to buy clamps too. That's exactly what can happen if you're not careful. Now you might be asking why in the world I'm making this video. This is kind of a video that really has no real content other than just kind of daily stuff that I deal with on an average weekend. But I've got some new software for editing videos, and I need some practice at it. And I gotta have some content to do it, so I figured I'd film this bullshit with the radiator and the hoses. I wish I'd have started earlier. Hopefully I can upload all of these clips and try to edit them into something worthwhile. It's really just practice for the software. Beyond that, really just kind of the daily shit that I deal with, aside from motorcycles and whatnot. Man, that's a pretty cool Pontiac. You can see that. That thing's cool. I'd ride that. $4. This ought to be pretty quick and easy. I'm just put these clamps on that hose. First we got to get in there, I guess. This little pack of hose clamps came with a few different ones. It's like 2 of a few different sizes. There's 2 here that are big enough for what I want to do. And we might shrink that down a little bit first. Make it a little smaller. Really ought to take the sticker off. Hold that for me. Just tighten them down. Easy peasy. There's the top clamp. What's up, bud?
What are you doing?
Putting hose clamps. So what it is, these are the clamps that were on those hoses. They're called spring clamps, and you squeeze them and it makes them open, and when you let off of them, they clamp around the hose. Well, that flex hose that we got, it's a lot thicker, and these aren't big enough, so I had to go get some what you call worm clamps. They're called worm clamps because they have a worm gear, and when you tighten this bolt or loosen it, it threads through the strip with these little slots here, and that makes it get smaller or larger.
So does your truck have a piping and all that stuff?
Mm-hmm.
What about Mitchell's camper?
Yep. Any vehicle that has a radiator, you know, vehicles that are air cooled won't have coolant hoses because there's no coolant. But any other vehicle, pretty much everything on the road's got coolant hoses nowadays. I have a thing that I can test what I want to test, but it's in storage, and I would have to move the world to get to it. Yeah, I've got so many toolboxes and equipment. I got to get everything out just to open the drawer because that storage unit is so full. Running out of light here, I can barely see how to line this fan up. Well, let's get the fan in, get some coolant in it, and we'll see what happens. I'm hoping for the best. How about you?
Maybe. That it doesn't bust again?
Yeah, or something else doesn't bust. Because I'd like to get this thing going. Is this the one that's got coolant, or is this water? That's water. Yep. I would grab. You have a 50% chance of grabbing the right thing, and I always grab the wrong thing. Ain't that something? Now we get to trickle coolant down in this little bitty neck here. Once we get this filled up, then I'll have Micah start the car and turn the heat on, and we'll run it until the thermostat opens and adjust the level. Typically that's when the air comes out of the engine and your level goes down, and we'll put the cap on it and see what happens. I really would like to start driving this car. You got the key?
Yep.
Alright, don't start it yet. Whoop. Let me Alright, do you remember how to turn the heat on?
Yep.
Follow Alright, now let it run. You know what? I don't think this thing even has a thermostat. Because we just started the car and I see coolant flowing. And that shouldn't be happening. You can see all those little bubbles coming out. That's what I'm worried about. So you don't see the level change that much. Now, if air was coming out of the cooling system, the coolant replaces it and the coolant level goes down. This is actually expelling coolant and I'm still getting those air bubbles, and that could be from combustion, and that's what I'm worried about. So what happens sometimes when you have a coolant leak, like in this case the radiator had busted, you fix that and the next weak point exposes itself, and you bust a hose, you replace that, then you bust another hose and you replace that, and you know, there's a cycle there. A lot of times you have a blown head gasket, you'll get compression from one of the cylinders into the cooling system, and it builds pressure, and that pressure will find a weak point in your cooling system. This right here is pretty indicative of a blown head gasket as well. Sometimes it's not that. There's ways to find your combustion gases in your coolant, and I have ways to do that, but like I said, everything I have is in storage that pertains to that, and to get to anything in my storage I have to take everything out just to open drawers, and it's not worth it. I figured I'd pop some hoses on here just to make sure. I really hate to see this. This could be a really good car, but I don't think it's worth a head gasket. I might do it. You know, if I really want to do a timing belt, because I don't know when it's been done last. So I wouldn't mind replacing the timing belt just to feel better about it. And you know, once you're at that point, it's not that much harder to get the head off. And I may do it at some point, but that's something I'm going to have to drink about. Yeah, I'm not sure what to think about that. You can see all that froth there. It's not looking good. Let's go ahead and put a little more in there. What's the temp gauge at? Oh, that's about normal. It's almost halfway, a little below. So I'm going to close this off and adjust the level and the overflow, and I'm going to shut the hood, because if this thing pops, I don't want to be in the firing line. And I don't want Micah to be in the firing line. That means where this hot coolant can spray us, because then we'll be going to the hospital. And I don't want to go to the hospital, because that's where the corona lives. Let's go drive it around.
But not too far.
You good back there?
Yeah.
Oh well.
At least I'm not in the danger zone of it.
No, you're fine. As long as we're in the car. Unless the heater cord pops. This thing runs pretty good. It's got a little sputter sometimes when you take off. Pretty sure I know what that is. That's worth fixing. But only if we don't have a blown head gasket. We'll see how it goes. I definitely want to get this thing warm. We was able to drive it for a couple of hours before. Even ran through the car wash twice while it was running. It did great. It was after we turned it off that the hose just popped. So far so good. Temp gauge is below half, and that's ideal. But the temp is not what I'm worried about, it's the pressure. there's too much pressure. Now, in theory, the cap should bleed off at 13 psi. That's supposed to be the weak point, but for some reason it never is. It's probably as hot as it's going to get right now. And I would imagine it's built up as much pressure as it's going to build up. The car runs good. Let's see what happens. So it's been about a week and I've had time to think about this. Now, I don't have my carbon tester, but I'm 99 point whatever percent. This has a blown head gasket. This car's been sitting for about a week. And I don't know if you heard that, but even from sitting here, there's still pressure in that system. And for what I have in it, I could do a head gasket and not lose any money. I really just don't want to take this thing apart. I could do it with my eyes closed, but I'm really done with that part of my life. Blue Devil head gasket sealer. I would normally never put something like this in a car or even condone it, but I guess for what I have in this, we're gonna find out if it'll do any good. The way I see it, if I get a few months out of this car, I haven't lost anything. So let me go ahead and fire it up. I got most of it in there, so we're gonna let it run for, it says 50 minutes, and we'll see what happens. All right, so I've had this thing running for more than an hour. All right, we'll let this thing cool off some, and then I'll top the cooling off, and we'll go from there and see what it does. That didn't work too well. I don't know if you can see that. We let it cool off and topped off the radiator and went for a good drive, and it did okay for a while. Then the temp gauge started getting kind of low, which concerned me. I should have turned around, and then started getting a little high. Got almost in the red. I pulled over. Now we're steaming. I'm not sure you can see that, but let it cool off a little bit and try to get it home. If not, I'll have to call a tow truck. I guess in the end, I wasted some money on a radiator and some hoses and the coolant. That bullshit in a bottle, whatever it's called, Blue Devil. Bullshit in a bottle. You know, any of that stuff is a gimmick anyways. I figure, what did I have to lose, you know? I've already got that little bit of money in it, so we're gonna sit and let it cool off and try to get it home. Whether it's driving it home or a tow truck. But I guess the conclusion is this car is really not worth the head gasket. I don't think it's worth that. I'm not gonna do it. And we'll just figure out what to do with the car from here. Pretty pegged out there. I can't hurt it anymore by trying to get it home. So every time I stop, I've got a cloud in front of me. Whatever. So I figured I would drive it home, and if it didn't make it, I'd get a tow truck. And if it does, great. And it did. Who knew the weak link this time would be the brand new radiator? That sucker is blown out. So that's what you get with a blown head gasket.
Where is
So
the head gasket anyway?
it's under the engine, it's under the head. It's right up under the head here. You got to take all that off, and it's not something I want to do. The hard part really is the timing belt and the intake, which is in the back. That intake, because the engine leans back, it's kind of hard to get back there without getting under the car. I really just don't want to do that. And, you know, for what it would cost, I think I could find a good running Camry if that's what I wanted.